a slightly different edition of it because we don't have 9 games, we don't have finals to go to, and it's trade period, and you are the doyen of the trade period. So in our conversations last night, I thought what we'd do is, I haven't had a lot to say about the trades, either present or historical. You can ask me whatever questions you like around trade period or trades as such. Obviously, you'll be going to the big headline items, but you can take buck stops wherever you like in terms of a trade edition.
Okay, I love this. So I've got carte blanche to take it wherever I want, which is good. So we will get to you as a coach and some broad questions and this year's trade period. But for some younger listeners, they might not be aware of your time at the Brisbane Bears and how you got to Collingwood, and how you got to choose the club that you went to after the Bears before the start of the 1993 season. Can you explain to us how that played out?
Yeah, that's a big one to start with. I came up really as a late mature in the SENFL, so I was on Brisbane's list by default. It was actually an arrangement through North Melbourne that North Melbourne had made with Brisbane to put me on the Brisbane Bears list. So I was there by default at the end of 92 when I was looking to move into the AFL environment, and at that stage had been courted really heavily by plenty of clubs. So the trade that ultimately occurred after my first season at the Bears between Brisbane and Collingwood was pretty extensive. I think it was pick 12 and a couple of players outside of Collingwood's top 10. So it was basically 3 players. Chris Scott was the pick 12 that went to Brisbane, and the 2 Collingwood players were Starcevic and Lehman. So I walked into Collingwood at the beginning of the 94 season as those 2, loved and respected teammates walked out. So that's the human side of the sort of the meat market that is trade.
But you knew at the start of 1993 that you wouldn't be at the Brisbane Bears by the end of 1993. Is that right? I
thought that would be the most likely alternative, but I didn't make that decision ultimately until late. I walked into Wolsey's office and said, I'm going to go.
How was that conversation?
Yeah, it was tough, because I just walked straight out of the board who'd hauled me over hot coals for what the speculation was doing to the football club. Knowing that I was going to walk out of there anyway and walk into Wolsey's office to let him know that, no, I'm off. I want to head down to Melbourne.
But hadn't the Bears made an arrangement with Collingwood before then?
There was not with Collingwood as such, but with me. Yeah. That there was on these terms that if I chose to pull the trigger, that these were the terms that the trade would take place.
So I think of similar scenarios. Tom Boyd leaving the Giants after a year. Jason Horne-Francis last year leaving North Melbourne. How is this different back then? Did it have the media attention and the public gaze on you?
It's different because you're in the middle of it, and that's a very real impact and challenge as a young man. And I felt like I was well out of my depth, and I'm sure that Jason Horne-Francis would have felt the same. Anthony Rocker came back to Melbourne after 3 years. I think it was 2 or 3 years in Sydney, and he was seen as a mummy's boy coming back home at the time. For me, it wasn't a family pull. It was because I wanted to play in big crowds at the MCG. It was more I felt like that was my destiny. That's where I dreamt about being as a young fella at a big club in front of big crowds. So I was driven to that for right or wrong.
Did you feel guilty about leaving the Bears after 1 year or not?
No. As I said, I was on the Bears list by default. I was an NT Queensland kid, and they had a list of 60 at that point.
60 players?
60 players, so 48 plus 12. And the last 12 were NT Queensland kids that had come up in either of those states. And all you need to do is write their name down, and they will listen. I didn't even know that my name had been written down, and I was a Brisbane Bear until a couple of weeks later.
So in your time at Collingwood, did you ever come close to leaving? Did anyone try to chase you?
No. Port Adelaide, I speculated going to Port Adelaide 3 years later when they came into the comp.
Did it become hard for you?
Yeah, I think I spoke about this with Jared. I was booed by Collingwood supporters late in 96 because I hadn't signed, and they thought that I was just going to head to Port, but that didn't. That was never going to happen.
Yeah, how did it feel to be booed by supporters?
Yeah, no, it's good. Yeah, so I've been booed by 18 clubs.
Yeah, okay. Well, just last one on this. What was Collingwood sell? Why were they above Essendon or Richmond or Carlton or any other big Victorian club?
No, I think that they were the keenest. They were definitely the keenest. And North Melbourne, the situation with North Melbourne's been well documented in many ways, but that was Greg Miller and Gubby Allen were basically going toe-to-toe, doing what they do and trying to manipulate the regulations as they stood and trying to project to what they would be in 5 years' time when it would look kosher. And they were the two that were playing the game the hardest.
Okay, let's talk about you as a coach because there's so much to get through here. But I think chronologically, I want to start.
Yep.
So when you take over as Collingwood coach, what is your influence on list management at that point? I remember Alan Didak and Heath Shaw; they all left at different times.
Yep.
There was other players as well. Did you actually have the final decision on these sorts of players?
The list management sort of panel or concept has developed, over the decades. I think. You need to have a really strong list manager and you need to be able to manage your salary cap really well to be successful. And I think we've seen that over the longest time. The most successful clubs are the ones that not only make the most, have got a great coaching capacity, but they make sure that they get their trades right and manage what they're spending on their players. But early days for me, not all of those were around trades. There's going to be turnover and there's going to be players that will come and go. Coaches, I found that I was, my major role was to coach the players that you had at your disposal. I was a little naive to list management early days. I think there were some decisions made sort of into 09, into 10 and 11 that were short-term decisions, and they came to fruition with a premiership and another grand final in 2011. So you can't say that wasn't successful.
Was there any player that you tried to get that you couldn't get across to the Magpies?
Oh, plenty.
So who was the main one?
Well, we went at one point there. We were looking at Tom Lynch when he moved down from Gold Coast, but I learned after the fact that we didn't have the scope.
In terms of money?
No.
Yeah.
We didn't have the scope. And there's two. Like, to be able to get a trade done, you need two things. One is the player needs to want to come to you. You need to be an attractive proposition first and foremost. Secondly, you need to have the TPP space to be able to pay him. And three, you need to be able to have the cachet to be able to facilitate the trade for the other club. So these are the details that need to take place. So sometimes you enter arenas that you really got no chance to participate in. It's probably wasted energy and emotion and time on something that wasn't going to come to fruition.
So did you meet these players mid-season?
Yeah, that happens. It probably happens more often than people think. Like, the Taylor Adams one is interesting. Like, managers play a massive role in the AFL environment, and this is where they do their best work because their job is to look after their talent. But they've also got a stable of talent, so it's not just one by one. They've still got to look after their stable, and they can manage that stable. And clubs understand that if you get a manager's nose out of joint, well, then you might miss out on player X or Y that's 3 or 4 or 5 years down the track. So it's a relationship that you need to navigate well, and the best list managers navigate the relationship with managers extremely well.
Do you remember meeting one player mid-season? I'd love some names.
Well, Lin Jong was the one.
Oh, Lin Jong, that was famous, wasn't it?
And that was no good for him. And really, I think the first people you think of, you're meeting with young men, and his name was then thrown, and I actually thrown around, and he had to face his teammates and his coach, who was quite combative about all of that because he was looking at what was there. He was still making his mind up about what he was going to do in his own personal career or professional career and what the next steps were, as every player should. But yeah, we didn't ever think that was going to get leaked or it was going to become public. But he had to face that and he had to endure that, and I felt bad for the young fella.
But I want to start first with Brodie Grundy Bucks. I think it was 2019 that he signed a long-term deal at the Pies.
Yep.
And my understanding at the time was that he came or his management came to the club and said Adelaide are keen and they'd offered him a long-term deal, and you managed to fit him in. How did that play out behind the scenes?
Well, not well, ultimately, as you can see. So I think some trades are actually really, that might look, that might not make sense from the outside. They're actually good for both parties. So if Brodie had have moved, whether it would have been free agency or trade at the end of 2019, he would have been a dual Copeland Trophy winner, back-to-back, 18 and 19. And we would have looked like we were going pretty well. And we probably would have looked mad letting a player like Brodie go. But it was definitely the move that we should have made, and it should have been made. And hindsight's a wonderful thing, but it would have been better for the club, and it would have been better for Brodie if you sort of move in a different direction. Broads gets back to Adelaide. He's happy at Adelaide Crows. Who knows what would have happened over that side, and we definitely would have been in better shape.
Did you think this at the time?
There were definitely conversations that took place internally that considered that alternative, and it was prevalent in our thinking through 2019.
So why did he stay then?
Because apparently we found a way to keep him
financially.
Yes.
Yeah.
And which has since proven to be a rod for the club's back and for Brodie's, and I'm rapt that he's I think about it from the human side of it. So Brodie's he's got to accept. He put his hand up. His manager drove a hard bargain at a level. He was playing awesome football, one of the best ruckman in the league with Max Gawn, all Australian, and had proven himself as one of the hottest commodities in the game. But you've still got to weigh that up against everything else and the circumstances that you're in, your TPP, your needs, where do rucks sit. But Broads has struggled through that last 3 years, and he hasn't, he's basically been unwanted at Collingwood, and for the reasons of being a part of the TPP that probably was easiest to shift and to change. And the other is that he chose a club that he was probably superfluous to. So now he goes to Sydney. He's required as a number one ruckman. He gets to be able to apply his trade. He's probably these next couple of years are the years that you should be playing your best football. And I'm really interested and hopeful that he can settle in and complete his AFL journey at a club and successfully.
So, tell me if I'm wrong here. My memory of the situation was that this is the Grundy situation, was that the football department was happy to let him go for the price that the Adelaide Crows were offering, not just for nothing, but for a really good trade. And it was the board who came over and said to the footy department, we need to find a way to keep Brodie Grundy. Did it play out like that, or is that too simplistic?
No, that's about right, but it wasn't so much about what we were going to get and what we weren't going to get. I think it was the proposition was that we can't afford to keep everyone, so we needed to make a hard decision, and then that hard decision was made, but we didn't follow through with it. Which
was to let him go?
Yeah.
Yeah. It's just remarkable that you could have a two-time Copeland Trophy winner, two-time All-Australian that is considered sort of superfluous to the needs of the football club. But I guess when the decision is made, as it seems to have been, you've all got to be behind it.
Yeah, I think the right people for the right time. I mean, in the end, you're an organisation, you're a group of individuals, and you've got to try and find the best mix of that together. I don't, what precipitated 12 months later with, pushing Adam Treloar out, and even at the end of 2019, James Aish was encouraged to go to Fremantle. Tom Phillips was in the conversation at the end of 19 and then ultimately in 2020 as well. So there were some players that were happy that were asked to leave, and that's pretty hard. That's a really tough position to be in, and not one that you'd like to. Not a favourable one. Definitely not in the senior coach position.
No, of course not. Adam Treloar was the next one at the end of 2020. Can I ask you about him? Because this was.
Yep.
This was a controversy at the time. Ned Guy was the list manager and you were the coach, and you were sort of the two front men of these decisions. How did it play out behind the scenes?
It my regrets there, I think I've spoken about this quite extensively, but my regrets were probably taking so much accountability for being the front man of that conversation. I would probably have left that to either Ned Guy, the list manager, or to Jeff Walsh, the director of footy, if I'd had my time again, because I had an existing relationship with Ads and I felt responsible for the position that we were in, and thought that I needed to be the one to have that convo with him. So, we're walking along the beach at up in Mooloolaba there in our hub, and it had been a tough period for everyone in the football industry, everyone in society, but everyone in the footy industry that was living away from home. And there was a suggestion that Ads' partner Kim was going to play up in Queensland, and we thought that there was a win-win there, and I was the one to have the conversation with Ads, and in the end we'd already decided that we needed to move his money out of the cap, and that once again that it was done against his will. So it was difficult to achieve. It was difficult to do, and relationships were strained and ultimately probably broken in that process.
Do you see a future where you can break bread with Adam Treloar, do you think?
I'm sure he's sick of reading about this. But when the time comes, if he indeed does, he's a great young fella, Ads, and I love watching him play for the Dogs. I loved watching him play for Collingwood, and I loved watching him play at GWS. He was a member of the under-16 Vic Country side that I coached. I think he's done remarkably well with a challenging upbringing. He's still, growing into himself and maturing as a young man. He's got a young family. I think he's done remarkably well. I'm very proud of him.
Am I right in saying that, and I've only got a couple more here, I know I'm testing you a bit, but that the decision to keep Brodie Grundy therefore meant you had to make harder decisions the next year on a variety of players?
It's not just on Broads. There's 45 odd players on a list, and you've got to manage them. But there are some chunky elements to that, and there are some times you're at 105% of your cap, and there's other times that you might be at 95, and like Essendon, who are spruiking, they've got cap space, or if you can create some cap space to go to the market, well, that's great. But I mean, you can. There is to manage and manipulate is part of the art to the science of producing a list that can go and contend. And not every club feels like they're going to be in the premiership window every year. That's just not the way it works. But when you're there, you want to hit it. And there was probably an element of the football club that thought we just lost the grand final by narrowly. We'd just been beaten by less than a goal in a prelim when we probably let that one slide. So we were thereabouts, but probably didn't get the numbers right. We didn't get the balance right, and ended up needing to force players out rather than letting the ones that wanted to go. Do you think this list management over that 2 or 3 year block cost you your job in the end? How much of an impact do you think it had? Oh, it's not a small reason. Yeah. But also the pain of the end of 2020 is and bringing that pain forward is not a small contributor to being clear of that over the last couple of years as well, which I think Graham Wright's been a great operator, and Jeff Walsh before was fantastic. I loved working under and with Walshy, and he's a great football person. But there was some decisions that we didn't get right, and that does cost jobs. But it also, I think they were made with the right intent, which freed it up for the next people to come through.
And it allowed Adam Treloar to go and make a fresh start. And Brodie Grundy went to Melbourne, and now he's at the Sydney Swans as the first choice ruckman.
But I think the part that I want to say, so this is my segment, even though you've hijacked
I've hijacked it. Sorry.
No. But in the end, like when we look at trades, there's so much analysis and there's so many things thrown about underneath all of these numbers, underneath this industry of the humans that exist within it. It's bloody hard to list manage. It's bloody hard to manage your players because you're trying to find what's best for them, but you've also got to consider that they're going to an environment that's going to allow them to become the best footballer they can be as well. And then you break it down to a smaller element of the players themselves. Like they're not just footballers. So moving away from family is tougher for some than others. Coming back to family or back to home or around their friendship groups. I mean, with Orazio Fantasia was big on getting back around family, and that was the pull to Adelaide when we actually had a quick chat with him. But ultimately, the rhyme or reason for every individual will be a little bit different. Not all of that will be abundantly clear to people who glean information through the media, but we don't spend enough time on the human part of it. And that's because as an industry, we're looking at what's best for the clubs or what the biggest headlines are. But, there's individuals can, sometimes they're going well, sometimes they're struggling. And being a footballer is a privilege, but there can be some tougher elements that you have to deal with, and moving clubs is one of them.
Just a message coming through. Well done, Nathan. You've been really reluctant to speak on these subjects in the past. It shows in this interview how much that pain still resonates in you. Well done on opening up. I agree with that. Let's get to some trade news. I don't know where you want to start, but
you just sent me a list of what's happening, and I'm having to scroll up and down a fair bit to get to them all.
That's okay. So I'm most interested in your thoughts on Jack Gunston and whether he is a good fit for Hawthorn or not, given that he wants to get back there.
Well, that would be interesting in itself, given that he'd only just left there 12 months ago. And I think Hawthorn seemed to me like they're in the youth phase and still building. I don't know whether Gunston fits the profile of where Sam Mitchell and the list management group have taken this group.
Can you say no to a 3-time premiership player who wants to come back? Is there any romance in this?
If he wants to come back and come do some assistant coaching. But he obviously wants to play.
He wants to play.
Yeah, but I suppose Jack Gunston isn't going to shift the dial on we thought when he went to Brisbane he was going to shift the dial on a premiership aspirations, and ultimately he wasn't fit to be able to impact on that, which there's no guarantees, but his leadership would have been important. But a year out of Victoria and maybe wanting to get back to family and finish his career off here for without really having any insight into that. But I'm not sure if it might be Hawthorn or bust for him. It might be a retirement if he doesn't get back.
I think he wants to play on. Is there another club that could use him? Could a Melbourne or a Collingwood use him?
Potentially. I mean, I think that
you liked him at Collingwood, didn't you?
Yeah, we'd look at him before he went up to Brisbane, actually, and once again probably didn't have the scope that we needed to be able to do it. And I think Hawthorn wanted a first rounder for him at that time. So things happen, things change. At his best, he's an extremely good player. We didn't see that this year.
Eyes on a couple of clubs today. So Carlton with Paddy Dow to St Kilda, Fremantle with Liam Henry to St Kilda. Mm-hmm. The Western Bulldogs with Nick Caulfield to them, and also Essendon and their role in the entire thing, because there's some conversations that are ongoing between Stephen Silvani and Nick Austin and David Walls about what draft picks should change hands. I think Nick Caulfield, the deal gets done pretty quickly and certainly pretty easily. I thought that deal would be done Friday. That'll just be a swap of late draft picks. Paddy Dow, again, I'm surprised this is stretched to the second week, but a deal will get done there as well. He'll end up being a St Kilda player, if not today, over the next 3 days.
Do you see through the trades as they sit, and do you see past them and look to the list managers at the football clubs and the managers of those individuals? Do you see any consistencies? So are some of the list managers a little bit harder to
deal with?
Well, yeah. Is there a rhythm? The way a trade works. Do you sort of know? Well, that makes sense because of the people behind it.
Absolutely. So I look at the way the Sydney Swans of Kinnear Beatson and Charlie Gardner have orchestrated their trade period so far. They're done. They've bought James Jordan as a free agent. They've done trades for Taylor Adams and Brodie Grundy. They've got the picks in that they wanted. They've given it up, and they've got Joel Hamling as a free agent. That's how the Sydney Swans operate. Very rare do they play hardball. They did with Jordan Dawson a little bit, but they didn't really have a lead to stand on. I think Graham Wright's very efficient, allowing Taylor Adams to go the way they did.
And Geelong are traditionally efficient, but they seem to be...
Yeah, well, I wanted to ask you about Asava Ratugolea.
Yeah.
So Port Adelaide got in pick 22 from Fremantle, specifically to offer it to Geelong. That's now pick 25 because pushed back for the reasons we know. And Geelong have said not just no, they've said we want Ollie Lord in return, who's a contracted Port player, and Port have laughed that off. So they're at a stalemate, Geelong and Port. And Port are also in a stalemate with Essendon over Xavier Dersma and Brandon Zerk-Thatcher. Essendon want it to be a straight player swap. They want to bring in Dersma to give up Zerk-Thatcher and move on. Port believe Dersma's more valuable than Zerk-Thatcher. They believe that he's contracted, and as a result, another draft pick should come back their way as well. So Port are trying to fight these, for lack of a better term, they're trying to fight these little battles on two
Multiple fronts. Yeah,
which is very difficult. But Geelong have traditionally been, Geelong fought a very hard battle with Jeremy Cameron. When they got him, they as a free agent, the Giants matched and they had to trade for him. These aren't easy. What do you think Radigalia is worth though? That's the question.
Well, there's two schools of thought with that. One is he's worth what as much as Port Adelaide need him on the field as an intercept defender to support Alia, to put some size in their back half that they just didn't have, and that has affected them in the last couple of Septembers. And obviously with availability hasn't been great for them in that back half either.
But on the face of it, do you think pick 25 should be enough?
Yeah, I do.
Yeah,
I do. But I mean, and in the end, that may be one of those ones that just runs to the wall. You've got to understand your opposition or the other side of it as well. I mean, pick 24 would be pretty good. They've been able to create a role for Radigalia as an intercept defender in the last 12 months, and he wasn't there before that.
So the other one is Hawthorn Football Club, which is holding up the Gold Coast Suns trying to offload Mabior Chol, and Richmond Football Club trying to bring in Jacob Kazitsky. Now, Hawthorn have asked for a pick around 25, 26 for Jacob Kazitsky. The Tigers aren't going to be giving up that, so they've got to work through those discussions. And Mabior Chol, well, the Hawks would like to use the pick 29 that they would hope to get from Richmond to get Chol, but they're not going to be able to have that pick 29. So it's fair to say that the Suns and the Tigers are aligned, but Hawthorn is the odd one out in those discussions. And I think a three-way trade would make sense if they can come to an agreement. But certainly the Hawks want a lot for Kazitsky, a player that they've offered just a one-year deal for.
I think Chol becomes attractive because he can play forward and as a second ruck. He's got the ability to go there at times if he needs to. Scott Lycett's an interesting one. There isn't a number one ruck role anywhere, but there is room for a player who is sort of there for a backup. Now that might be Melbourne. Who knows? I have no information about that. The other one for me, the interest is the pick one, and like if you could get 3 picks in the first 20, like if that's where the way it ends up, like I would. I mean, I don't know how good Harley Reid is. I haven't seen enough of him, and there would be people that would just say, no, you just need to get that player in. But if you could spread the risk or the upside, for a side that is in a regeneration phase like West Coast, I think I'd be looking at the best deal that you could get. If you got 3 picks, between 8 and, or if you could get a 3 and then a 15 and an 18, I just can't see why you wouldn't.
Well, North
that.
has 2, 3, 15, 17 and 18 at the moment. And they're clearly keen to move up to pick 1. So are Melbourne. They've got 6, 11. Maybe they could throw in a future first, the Demons. But
then the other thing is, what do you spend to do that? See, if you have got that cachet as a side that's redeveloping and regenerating yourself, you'd be going from those 3 picks to the 1. And then another potential side in regeneration in the West Coast would be going from 1 to 3 picks. So arguably in a similar position, but with a different philosophy. So, and only West Coast has the whip hand because they're the ones that dictate which philosophy they want to follow, whether they want the premier player in the competition, who we're assuming is Harley Reid, or whether they want a pick of 2 or 3 of the next best dozen.